Okay, I'm here going to do brass. No, sorry, I did brass. This is Haldeman's DX. And so we have another concrete poem where things are broken up and distributed, and there's going to be a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, we'll go through the poem, and then that is, I'll read the poem, and then we'll go back. So every night you build a little house, you dig a hole and cover it with logs. Cover with logs with sandbags against the shrapnel weather. A house you sleep beside and hope not to enter. Some nights you wake to noise and light and metal singing. Roll out of the bag and into the house with all the scorpions, centipedes, roaches, and no bullets flying inside it. Most nights you just sleep. Deep sleep and dreamless, mostly from labor. This night was just sleep. In the morning you unbuild a house. Hours of work again for nothing. Kick the logs away, pour out the sandbags into the hole. Roll up the sandbags for the next night's bit of rural-urban renewal. Eat some cold, bad food. Clean your weapon. Drink instant coffee from a can. Check the tape on the grenades. Check the pins. Inspect ammo clips. Clean the top rounds with illegal gasoline. Most carefully repack the demolition bag, blasting caps, TNT, plastic, time fuse, dead cord. 10 kilograms of fragile, most instant death. Then shoulder the heavy rucksack, secure your weapons and tools, and follow the other primates into the jungle, watching the trees. Walk silently as possible through the green, watching the ground. Don't get too close to the man in front of you. This is good advice. Don't let the enemy have two targets. Remember that. Don't get too close to any man. Only a fool or an officer doesn't grab the ground at the first shot, high-pitched rattle of M16s. Even if it's rather distant, louder Russian rifles answer, even if it's a couple of clicks away. Manly chug of heavy machine guns. God knows which way they're shooting. Grenades, flat bang. Like fools or officers, we get up off the ground and move, all that metal flying through the air. And do we move away from it? No. Like fools or officers, we head for the action. We make haste in the wrong direction. Making lots of noise now. Who cares now? But careful not to bunch up. Remember, don't get too close to any man. It's over before we get there. The enemy, not fools, perhaps lacking officers, went in the proper direction. As we approach the abandoned enemy camp, a bit of impolite and perhaps to you incomprehensible dialogue greets us. You want to get some x-rays down here? Charlie left a motherfucking DX pile behind. Terms. X-rays are engineers, demolition men, us. Charlie is the enemy. DX means destroy. A DX pile is a collection of explosives that are no longer trustworthy. When you leave the camp, finally, you put a long fuse on the DX pile and blow it up. Both motherfucker and DX are technical terms that can serve as polite euphemisms. Private, you want to DX that motherfucker. Instead of private, kill that man. We've been lucky. No shooting, just a pile of explosives leftovers to dispose of. And we'd done it before. It was quite a pile, though, taller than a man. Artillery shells, mortar rounds, satchel charges, rifle grenades, all enough to kill everybody with some left over, festooned with chains of 50 caliber ammunition. The major wouldn't let us evacuate the troops and then put a long fuse on the pile. We had to stand there nervous and guarded. No. They'd been working hard when they first got lunch and a nap, and now we can move them out, and we can blow it. We like this, we. We didn't know it was wired for sound. It was booby-trapped. Remember, don't get too close to any man. Don't know that Farmer had an actual farm waiting back in Alabama, and don't know that Crowder has new grandbabies and is headed for retirement when he gets home. And don't know that Doc was a basketball champ in his black high school and really did want to be a doctor, because they're all one short beep of a radio detonator away from a sound so loud you don't hear it really. Gray smoke, blood. It just hits you like a car. Everywhere blood and screaming. Doc, with both his long legs blown off, dies quickly. Sergeant Crowder, separated from one foot, is unconscious or stoic. Farmer had his belly spilled but lived long enough to shout, "Professor, where'd they get you?" And, since I didn't have enough breath for a complete catalog, foot, shins, knees, thigh, groin, genitals, arm, ear, scalp, and disposition, I settled for the balls. "Oh my God," Farmer said. Then he died. 2 days later, I woke up in a dirty hospital, set up like Frankenstein's charge. Woke up in time to see Crowder leave with a sheet over his eyes, and so it was over, in a way. The whole squad DX, but me. There is nothing for it. There is nothing you can take for it. They are names on a wall now. They are compost in Arlington, and somehow I am not. But give me this. There are 3 other universes like this. In one, Farmer curses the rain, wrestles his tractor through the mud, curses the bank that owns it, and sometimes remembers that he alone survived. In another, Crowder tells grown grandchildren for the 100th time over a late-night whiskey his one war story that beats all the others to hell. In the third, Doc stands over a bloody patient, steady hand, healing knife, and sometimes he recalls bloody years past, and sometimes remembers to be glad to be alive. In these worlds, I am dead and at peace. Okay, so this is a very long narrative poem. Relatively, I mean, this kind of narrative poetry has sort of gone out of style, sort of. And it is largely self-explanatory. I mean, the job of the squad is to, as I've talked about, to go out and search and destroy missions. And the engineers, combat engineers, which is what Haldeman was, have this particular job of blowing down trees so helicopters can get in and land, and of destroying useless weapons which are dangerous, which is obviously a very dangerous thing. And they carry the kit. So if we look at the way that the poem is organized, I mean, it's very, very smart. And Haldeman is extremely sensitive to the language here. So when there are separations, it's because there need to be separations, and to some extent the text is staggered the way the human beings in the field are supposed to be staggered. You don't bunch up, and this is one of the things that the infantry has to learn to do. I mean, people like to be together in a clump, and the one thing they have to learn is not to group up, and they're supposed to maintain a distance of about 10 feet, which now makes a bit more sense to us, I think, between each one of them, so that if one person gets shot, you don't give the enemy multiple targets is the idea. And so basically this process of digging a bunker, which is what the little house is the daily occurrence. You arrive at the end of a day's hike, basically, with this big pack. And the last thing you have to do before you basically get to make camp and have some of this disgusting sort of food that comes in these cans, and have a smoke or whatever it is you have to dig. And you've got to dig a bunker hole that is going to be good enough. I mean, the deeper you dig, the safer it is. So your own safety is up to you. How deep do you want to dig? Well, how much energy do you have? And this isn't sandy soil. This is hard, this particular red earth of Vietnam, which is called laterite soil, which has got a lot of iron in it, which is why it's so red. And so, as he says, you cover with sandbags against the shrapnel weather. So you actually carry your own burlap bags that are sandbags, and you fill them. So you're digging, and with the stuff you dig out of the hole, you fill sandbags. So you dig down, let's say, a couple of feet if you have the energy for it, and you got to get your body into this. And then you put the sandbags that you've been filling around the hole, and then you sleep outside. And in the morning, you got to undo it. So you empty all the sandbags out, roll them up, and take them with you. So you're carrying your own sandbags, right? And your entrenching tool. It's a little tiny shovel, which it means you have to stoop to dig. So you're going to get a very sore back. And as he says, some nights you wake to noise and light and the metal singing, which means, the metal's just flying around, and you've got to get not just on the earth, but below the earth. And of course, it's a hole you've just made, so this is wonderful for all the bugs. Are like, this is a great, the centipedes. And these are poisonous centipedes. They actually sting. I mean, the tropics is just full of sort of wonderful bugs, and if you're not a bug person, and I certainly am not a bug person, you're going to roll into this hole. It's going to be full of disgusting, terrifying creatures that can kill you or make you seriously ill. Scorpions, centipedes, and so on. But you don't care because you're not going to be killed by metal, at least. And then you unbuild the house. Okay, so, and then he's very good with the language. This like how bad is the food? It's cold, bad food, and this reliance on these single syllable words like this is something which goes back to the 17th century, at least. Where if you look at poetry from Milton, I'm thinking of Milton specifically, where there are huge passages in Paradise Lost where he just uses words of one syllable to, it's just rocks, fens, bogs, caves. This is amazing stuff. So it's that kind of thing. Drink instant coffee from a can. So these cans, you'd open a can of coffee, and I gather they were just disgusting. They've changed this now, so the MREs, the meals ready to eat, they actually put a packet of coffee in. But since most of the time you can't get hot water in the field, in Iraq and Afghanistan, the guys just actually ate the instant coffee, and then they would take a mouthful of instant coffee grounds and then take 2 mouthfuls of water and then swallow it. Oh, God. Ugh. So, and then you inspect all the stuff you're carrying, which is explosives. So the thing about carrying plastique, as it's often called, C4, plastic explosive, which kind of feels like putty, like a sort of hard, like clay, basically, is that it is not explosive if you shoot it. It probably won't go off. So it's not dangerous in that way. It's very stable. But you have to have blasting caps to set it off. So the blasting cap is kind of like a big firecracker, which is extremely dangerous, a firecracker that can kill you. And so you put a wire into the C4, block of C4. You've seen this in lots of movies. You crimp a blasting cap onto the wire, and then you set a timer on the fuse, and the blasting cap goes off. It puts an electrical charge into the C4, and that's what sets off the C4. So, that's relatively simple. But if you're carrying and TNT as well, sticks of dynamite, where what you're doing basically is dynamite sticks still are and still can be bad. I mean, they can go bad. They can get wet, which means that the material that's in them, which is fundamentally nitroglycerin, some form of nitroglycerin, which is highly unstable, has been stabilized by putting it into the material in these sticks. So you're carrying these waxy sticks, which again shouldn't be explosive. So if you get hit, if your pack gets fired on, let's say you take a rifle shot, it shouldn't set off your pack. That's what you hope. So, as he says, 10 kilograms of fragile, most instant death. Now, 10 kilos, right away, that's 20 pounds in your pack that you're carrying, right? Let alone the water that you need and the food that you're going to be carrying and all the other stuff, your own munitions and your own rifle and your own trenching tool and all of the things that you're going to have on you. And then you follow the other primates. So he looks at this as being really, it's primitive, that this is, and he sort of like, he goes back in time to this time when you're basically hunter-gatherers again. It's sort of this commentary on what it is to be a contemporary soldier, which is still very savage, and I'm using savage here in a way where, by the Enlightenment's worldview, basically, these would be savages. Basically people who are barely literate, don't use language, sort of just grunt. They are grunts. So he says, follow the other primates into the jungle because you're going back into the jungle off the veldt. You're going back into the trees, watching the trees, watching the ground, and so on. And there's this, again, there are a couple of core issues at the center of this text, which are the explosion, which is at the center of the text, the demolition, the DX, which blows everybody up, which blows up the whole relationship. It ends basically everybody's lives except for this one often, unlucky survivor, the person who's suffering survivor's guilt in this case, and the connections between people. So don't get too close to any man, which is how you're gonna stay alive. You're gonna stay alive in the field because the people around you are going to, one way or another, look out for you, or you look around and you're like, okay, I'm doing this because they do it. And very often in battlefield situations, men will behave, or people, soldiers, will do what they do because there is somebody else there. But if there isn't somebody else there, they may not actually get up and move. They may not act, which makes a lot of sense. And so then there's this, now on his page 219, our page 17, and on the right-hand side of the poem, it's all weapons. The M16, the Kalashnikovs, the grenade, and all this metal is sort of flying through the air now. So there's this weather pattern. Now, Vonnegut talks about this as well in Slaughterhouse-Five, where he talks about the bombing of Dresden, which he survives, and the weather that men make outside, which is mostly full of metal rain. So the A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, the song A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, had enormous meaning for the guys in Vietnam, because the hard rain was steel, shrapnel. Right? Okay, so then he talks about officers, and then there's these definitions of basically sort of like what do these terms mean? Okay, and then there's this. It's quite a pile, artillery shells, and so he sort of stacks up a literary pile of words, and then there's the explosion. It was booby trapped. So in this particular story, the enemy has left behind this pile of stuff, which, like, why bother moving shells and things that you can't use? Either it's too heavy or it's junk. One way or another, it got wet, or it stopped. It didn't operate properly, or it's a dud. Or, as I say, you just don't have the time to get out. You need to leave. You need to get away. The troops are coming, so you leave behind this pile. But you can wire the pile. So you wire it and you bury a fuse so it can't be seen. And when you know that the people are encamped around it, you blow it, right? So, which is what happens here. And then there are the sort of three stories that he focuses on, and the death of everybody else around him. And then there's this, there's nothing for it. So, what is the survivor to do? How is the survivor to handle survivor's guilt? And really there's no answer for that. You have to find a way to live that is somehow, why did you survive? What was the reason? What was the purpose for your survival? And some people can't, they can't sustain the burden of being the only the sole survivor. It's just, this is just a terrible position to be in. And so there's a real, for me, there's a real point here where the poet arrives at probably what is the real ending. There is nothing for it. There is nothing you can take for it. So pills are not going to help you. Booze is not going to help you. And drugs, no. There are names on a wall now. This is the wall, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Arlington, Washington. You can look it up. It's an amazing piece of sculpture and a memorial, and it changed everybody's view of what memorialization could be. It's a huge, in itself, caused a huge fight, and it was, and it is truly remarkable. It is one of the early remarkable postmodern memorials that there is, and it's Maya Lin, who was the very young woman. She was 17, 18, I think, when she was awarded this, because it was a blind thing. Like a bunch of people submitted. I think there were hundreds of submissions, basically, for designs of the wall, and hers won. And then they were like, oh wow, we chose this young woman who was 18, had just started architectural school, was working on monuments in her prof said, why don't you submit that to the, and she wins. And she has gone on to produce some truly astonishing, I think very touching, very affecting memorials, which are far superior to the sort of standard erection monument. In general, monuments go above the ground, memorials go below the ground, because a memorial is seen as a grave and a monument is seen as, a monument to our heroic dead. And this is not the take that Maya Lin had. Her background is not Vietnamese. Her background is Chinese. In case you're curious and think, wait a minute, did they by accident basically choose a Vietnamese person of Vietnamese descent? No, but an American. So that's the wall, and everybody just sort of knows it. It's like, yeah, the wall, the black wall. Near Compost in Arlington, every soldier or person who has served or has been a member of the armed forces, Navy, or Army, Air Force, doesn't matter, a member of the military forces, has the right to be asked to be buried in Arlington. And it's interesting, they're running out of space. It's not a surprise. If you go to Arlington, so again, on the south part of the mall, where the wall is in Washington, if you keep walking south, you'll get to the bridge that goes over the Potomac, which is the river right there. It's all very historical because, the Civil War came right there. The Army camped on the banks of the Potomac. So the whole thing is just loaded with history. And the bridge is they walked, if you've seen it, footage or pictures of Kennedy's burial, they walked the casket across this bridge with horses, like two or four, I can't remember, two black horses drawing this open bier, I guess, BIER, with the casket of Kennedy and so on, because it was such an enormous it was considered to be a serious national trauma, and it was a national trauma. So they walked because he had served in the Navy, across the bridge to Arlington. And so Arlington is right there. So if you go to visit D.C., which I recommend, and just wait for the COVID to be over, and I'd wait until the election is over, and we see what happens with the election. So don't be rushing off to Washington in the next couple of months. I don't recommend it at all. It's not a good idea. Just south of Washington is Virginia, because Washington is a district, right? District of Columbia. It's not a city. It's a district. Okay, it's not a state. Okay. They are compost in Arlington, so that's where the ashes, basically, or whatever, the dead bodies end up of these soldiers. And somehow I am not. Okay, and this is really, for me, that's it. The end. It's the end of the text. But then there's this sort of epilogue where the poet imagines, what if, give me this little shred of hope, basically, that somewhere I'm at peace and dead, and the others have lived. A very touching poem, and a very beautiful poem.